but that's...
well, President survived.
Okay.
You're
Okay.
thoughts right now.
Good morning and welcome to the Hudson Institute. I'm Tim Walton. I'm a senior fellow in Hudson's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology, and I'm really grateful that all of you have taken the time to join us for what I think should be a really timely and rich conversation on achieving electromagnetic spectrum superiority with the Congressional Electromagnetic Warfare Working Group. To kick us off and to introduce our distinguished guests and open the floor to them is Brian Hinckley, who's president of the Association of Old Crows. Brian served for 27 years as a Naval Electronic Countermeasures Officer, conducting operations over Libya, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Iraq, Afghanistan, leading one of the key joint counter improvised improvised explosive device units in Iraq, and then standing up the Navy's first Fleet Electronic Warfare Center before retiring as a captain. He now serves as president of the AOC, which is the world's preeminent professional nonprofit organization focused on electronic warfare and tactical information operations.
I think he flew the EA-6 for some reason.
I'm not sure it's the parent, but yes, that I did. Well, thank you, Tim. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My remarks will be very short because we're here to listen to our esteemed panel. We're very, very lucky to have from Congress Representatives Houlihan from Pennsylvania, Bacon from Nebraska, and Larson from Washington. They have been tremendous advocates with over 20 years of service on the Congressional, the EW Working Group, over, I think, 5 years, and appreciate you brand new and bringing in some new energy and an MIT degree to help us with advancing technology. So it's very, very important. I appreciate your notes or your words on the AOC. We're very, very proud, and I'm proud to be here to represent over 14,000 members, 70 chapters in almost 30 countries. So we just came from AOC Europe. We've had events all over the world, and we're looking forward to our big event this December. It's every December here in the DC area. For the next 5 years, we'll be at the Gaylord. So I'm looking forward to that. But, well, let's get started, and we'll get into some of the questions that have been sent in. So let me kind of go to the first one here, and we'll talk about last week's National Defense Authorization Act. I know Congressman Bacon has been very successful at getting some language in there and approved unanimously. How do you view the EMSO capabilities for electromagnetic spectrum operations? How will they fare in the House's authorization bill? Are there particular areas where you've worked to apply either additional insight or investment?
Want me to start? Okay.
Please.
First of all, it's great to be back. I joined the Air Force in 1985, a long time electronic warfare guy. I was RC-135s, EC-130s. I'm wearing my AOC tie today, just to so Brian asked me easier questions. But a little backdrop, if I may. When I came in 1985, I thought the electronic warfare capabilities of the United States was second to none. We were the preeminent EW military in the world. We had the iron on the ramp with the, we call it the electronic warfare triad. We had the EA-6s, the Compass Call, Rivet Joint. You had the F-4Gs, and we had a great strategy. We had a great personnel development system with electronic warfare school. We had a 2-star in charge, at least in the Air Force. You had a lot more oversight in the Joint Staff. But after 1991, when we just totally kicked the living bejeebers out of Iraq, we felt like we didn't need EW as much anymore. So we put it in autopilot, and over the time, it just sort of withered and atrophied. And even in the 90s, I felt like we still had the preeminent EW, but by the time I was a colonel, brigadier general, it was clear that we let things atrophy to a large degree, and Russia and China in many areas had surpassed us because they were focused on it. So, one of the storylines in EW is if you feel like you're the dominant power, you don't need EW. You need EW if you feel like you're struggling, you have a hard time getting aircraft over a target and back, then you invest in EW. Russia and China were doing that, we were not. So then when I got elected in 2017 and working with Congressman Larson initially, we've been able to put a lot of good things in legislation. We've been able to mandate that the DOD or Joint Staff put people in charge that we can hold accountable, a new strategy, a new implementation plan, insist that each COCOM has electronic magnetic cell that can have a standardized way of looking at the electronic warfare capabilities in each COCOM, and we've done that. But now to get to your question, I want to put that as a backdrop. We did not get much done in this particular NDAA when it comes to electronic magnetic spectrum operations. Most of the work was done last year, where we were able to procure 4 more Compass Call aircraft. You were doing stuff on the EF-18. This time it was more because we have a more restricted budget this year. It's under inflation. We didn't get as much done, and it concerns me because we had an opportunity to expand more Compass Call aircraft, Navy, maybe more Navy EW, and we saw very little in the actual budgeting that came out in electronic warfare realm. And so we didn't get as much done as I would like this NDA. Last NDA, we got a lot done.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add to that one? We can move on, or?
I'll just quickly say, since I got unceremoniously kicked off the Armed Services Committee, if I could apply to be an associate member of the AOC. No. As the ranking member on the Transportation Committee, under our caucus rules, I couldn't serve on HASC, so I've had to step off of HASC. But I say in the 22 years on HASC, one of the great pleasures has been working on this set of issues, and I'll continue to work on the set of issues. And if I could maybe offer a quick 22-year perspective, is that funding for EW or MSO is feast or famine. It's feast when we need it, and we always need it too late because we're in a famine mode. When we think we don't need it anymore, and the truth is we know we always need it. And you think about rivet joint or the growlers or compass call, they're in use right now. All those are in use right now. The growlers out of Whidbey Island were deployed last year into Germany in support of the mission, in support of the NATO mission against Russia, not in Ukraine, but around Ukraine. So as an example of how we continue to use the airborne platforms. And that's where I got first involved in this as well, certainly because of the airborne electronic attack platforms that previously the Prowler, now the Growler. And I'll continue to do that. But I think, again, it's been feast or famine is one lesson. The second lesson is kind of what Don alluded to, is you need leadership at the Pentagon. You need a training aspect to make sure there's always people coming in the pipeline. You need to partner with the research labs, any research labs, preferably the military research labs, and the industry to keep up on what spectrum is, how it's changing, how it's being used, how others are using it, and what you need to do to counter that. I mean, those are always the 4 key elements. And I only know this because we wrote this report, I think, in 2003. Mm-hmm. So the framework's always there. We just have to fill it, and the Pentagon needs to fill that framework too.
Could I add one quick thing, because I'm the new person on this panel, is the last part of the puzzle, I think, is education. Education, not just of people who know all the things and who've been doing it for a long time, and education of the HASC and the Intel Committee and any number of intersectionalities that exist for this, but also just education of the common member of Congress in terms of why it is that we were talking about these issues and why we care about them and why we need to fund them. Having served 1,000,000 years ago, I left in 1992 the military. I feel like everything old is new again. You know, you come back in 30-something years later and it all looks similar, or at least rhymes. And so I think that that's, you know, another aspect of trying to make sure that we can educate the public and educate the people who are making the votes on why this kind of thing is important.
Hey, Brian, if you could just put an exclamation point on something. If it wasn't for Congress, any progress we made in the last 6 or 7 years, I don't think would happen.
Yeah.
The military was not interested generally in putting someone in charge, new strategy, funding lines. It was us mandating it in the NDAA. And a lot of times the military doesn't want congressional interference. I think in this case, we did some good.
I call it oversight.
Oversight. I like that.
It's not interference.
Well, ma'am, you've obviously already been working through Congress with the DoD on improving how we can not only find the right young folks with the right technology to keep our community strong, but also to retain them. So this question follows a little bit more along that, not just the education, but the industrial base that we were talking about, partnering with labs, whether we're talking about OEMs or whether we're talking about some of the niche small businesses that can bring their capability to bear. How do you view the EMSO industrial base for building new capabilities and the degree to which it can leverage commercial capacity? I know you were, Congress recently passed I think it was $280 billion in the CHIPS Act. So I know you're familiar with that. So anything, I see Shoes in the audience, anything to talk about opportunities using 5G to shore up the supply chain, which I know you're personally invested in?
Well, I think that this kind of speaks to the conversation that I was trying to allude to, which is this is not just a DoD-centric conversation, although it is obviously about national security, but it's also about sharing capabilities, technologies, understanding people across DoD and industry, and making sure that we are taking advantage of all of the capacity that we have, and that means benefiting from commercial industry and also potentially 5G as well. And so I don't know how that's all going to shake out. I know that Don asked a lot of questions yesterday when we were at the Pentagon and other places about spectrum sharing and about how we were going to work that out, if we were going to work that out, what the implications would be for that. But these conversations can't happen just in the Pentagon. They need to happen across all of the different parts of industry and as you mentioned, in terms of the commercial industry as well. I hope that CHIPS Act, as an example, will be a beginning of a longer process of trying to bring industry back here domestically and also, creating jobs and opportunities. And you started the question with a workforce question, I thought. Making sure that we also have the workforce that's capable of understanding these issues is really, really important too.
Right. We appreciate your efforts in that. I think we have a question.
I think the question of spectrum sharing, 5G, S-band interference is, I think, one that was started to bubble up in maybe 5 years ago, but now is a pretty hot topic. As you work with your colleagues in sort of other committees and the like, how have those conversations been, and what path do you see forward for, I think, DoD and other stakeholders to be able to best use the spectrum, either through allocation, through new electromagnetic battle management capabilities that we could use domestically and abroad? What are some of your thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, I can provide some lessons from the transportation world in the last couple of years. First, I want to say that as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we put a report in that for the DoD to conduct a study on the 3.1 to 3.45 segment of the spectrum. I'm reading the numbers. I want to get the numbers right and not make news here. So that was due in March, and I just want to sit you down because it's breaking news. The Pentagon didn't meet that deadline for the report. So we're continuing to press the Pentagon, and the issue there is the industry believes, spectrum sharing can occur, and it's all pretty easy the way to do it, depending on how you define it and so on. And the DoD's view is this is our spectrum, we need it and can't share it. And is there a place in between? I'm not suggesting that there is absolutely a place in between, but I do know this, and this is the lesson. From the 5G altimeter issue that we had with the FAA, and I won't go into it, but it's long and frustrating. But what we found in this debate between the FAA and the FCC and the NTIA and a lot of other alphabets and the telecom industry, is that there was a solution, a technical solution, but no one believed it actually could happen because they weren't even talking to each other in the first place. As an example, the telecom engineers and the engineers who do FAA engineering stuff have one thing in common. They're engineers. That's the only thing they have in common.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. That said, you know the term is all Greek to me, right? You can't read Greek or whatever, but with apologies to my good friends in Greece. Telecom engineers use Greek letters and aerospace engineers use Greek letters. They use the same Greek letters and they mean different things for their uses in telecom and aerospace. That is how basic the misunderstanding is. Like the engineers can't even talk to each other because their languages are literally different. And that's a lesson we learned, and it's been learned. We've created a process now because there's going to be 6G and XG and the next G, and at some point, this altimeter issue is going to continue to evolve with the technology. And I think that lesson can apply to the DoD spectrum sharing issue. It's one of the lessons. They first need to start sitting down and saying, okay, how do you use the gamma letter? How do you use delta? How do you use epsilon? Let's start there and then go from there. But right now, we're not. The discussion is saying it's ours, you can't use it, and telecom saying no, it's totally possible to share. And telecom may be absolutely wrong, and the DoD may be wrong. I have no idea. But they do need to have these conversations, and I think that's what one thing we
Totally agree.
learned.
What I heard yesterday in the Pentagon is similar to what I hear sometimes on this R's and D's side of things, is that we only listen to each other, and so if we're listening to message points from one another on the D side and R's are listening to their message points as well, not everybody can be an expert on everything, and so you're just trying to listen and learn to what the presumable expert thinks. And so if you're sitting in the Pentagon and what you hear is a leader that you respect saying something like, well, we have to vacate the spectrum and it's impossible, then you just believe that that's true. And the same goes for the other side. And so we have to be able to communicate. And I don't think that's happening.
So those critical mission areas, our S-band, excuse me, our S-band's area is very, we were talking to the 4-star level yesterday, very important to a lot of our radar missions that are out there. And you don't want to degrade that, yet 5G is very critical to our economy. So they're both very important. And I think if we could find a technical solution, that's obviously the optimal, but nobody believes it, like you were saying. Nobody thinks it's going to happen. But we have to prove that it's going to work, because we need 5G and we have to have important radar missions that the DoD operates. But if we can't prove it, you can't just vacate the radar missions that are already out there. So they're going to have to prove that this 5G can operate in that space.
Yeah, one of the challenges we had in this debate was the proprietary nature of almost nearly everything telecoms do, and there's nothing against them. It's just that finding out that where a tower sits, and as well as which angle the radio is sitting, that's proprietary. And so they didn't want to give up that information to the FAA because they're concerned they were going to share that with one of the competitors in order to create this space where the altimeters could work. And well, they've figured out a way to have a third party in between to do that. And I think they're going to run into the same kinds of problems, right? The DoD says we can't share X. Like, well, we don't need X. We need X minus something. And telecom's going to say, well, we can't share X, or we can't share Y. I said, well, we don't need Y. We need Y minus something to figure this out. But they need to have those conversations.
That was really helpful, and I'll sort of offer, if this is a challenge domestically, it could certainly be one abroad, right? So here in the United States, in theory, perhaps we could govern how we use the spectrum. Doesn't necessarily mean we will do it anywhere else U.S. military forces will operate, either friendly countries or adversary ones. So we probably need to think of approaches that work here domestically, but also take advantage of electromagnetic battle management capabilities or others so that we can dynamically operate in areas where there will be interference. The spectrum will be congested no matter what. Yeah. Brian, I think you had another question there.
I certainly do. Let's see. I know we've talked a little bit about readiness. We've talked about the non-material readiness in the training and the workforce. It's been a struggle. We obviously were more successful in last year's NDAA than maybe this year's. Cyber, for instance, the cyber force has done seemingly extremely well. But electromagnetic warfare has seemed to have not done so well. We talked about the funding of it. Seems to be the last to fund in peacetime and the first to scream for in a crisis. And that hasn't changed over the last 20, 30 years. Because we've talked about those, let's go to a specific example. Stratcom stood up the GEMSOC, the Joint EMS Operations Center, that's supposed to raise and aggregate force readiness across DoD. Do you think that this organization has the potential to do what it needs to do for EMSO governance and development? Because I'll be quite honest, I haven't seen it really produce yet.
It just stood up.
Yeah,
In fact, it's going to be next week.
Know that it had.
So I think it's next week or the following week.
Yeah.
It's going to actually have its ribbon cutting.
Yeah.
So I just taped some remarks for it. So it hasn't been really stood up yet. I think we need a center of excellence that advocates for electronic warfare, or EMSO. We don't really have that in the military. We need somebody that says, and it's going to be at the 2-star level, it's two-star Air Force officer is going to command this. So I look forward to having someone advocating and being the lead on this whole issue, which we don't have. I personally think electronic warfare, or EMSO, should be under the J3 or the J5. It should be under operational. It should be treated that way, just like any of the other putting bombs on target. We're going to put trons on target. Once you move it out of that area, it gets put in, and it's not in the main focus of operations. And EW should be one of the focus areas of operations. But the JEC is a product of the work that we've done in the NDA, frankly. We have forced putting people in the lead that we can hold accountable. Now, when I first got elected, you walk into any service, you go, who's responsible for EW? And they go, our vice service chief is. Oh, he's got like 3,000 things he's got to do, right? Well, I want to see a 1-star or 2-star that we can call in committee and, hold accountable, right? I didn't mean the fist thing literally, but we want to hold people accountable. And if nobody's in charge, if everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge.
Right.
And if nobody's in charge, nobody's in charge. I mean, and that's what was going on. So I think we've really made some good progress here. But my concern is even last year's NDA, we would have not had the great results if it wasn't for Congress. It wasn't the DoD coming in saying, here's our plan for EW. No, it was we coming in saying, okay, we're going to add 4 aircraft here. We're going to protect this fleet. We're going to do this and that. And so I feel once again, Congress is dominant. But my main concern is it's well and good to have the JEC strategy and doctrine until you actually start seeing, I'll just call it iron, capability. The ability to put military capabilities out in the field, then it's all talk. And so I'm seeing mainly a lot of talk, a lot of thinking going on behind closed doors. I don't see the output, the actual combat capability output that we need in EW. And so we're not there yet. We're moving. Well, I think a lot of planning, not a lot of output.
Do you think the events of Ukraine and the kind of last year and so that's happening in Ukraine has made a difference in people's hearts and minds in the military as opposed to Congress? I hate to be the one answering the question, but I'm curious.
Fair.
Well, EW is obviously having an impact or lack
Sure.
thereof.
Yeah.
So on the downside in Ukraine, think about day 1 or day 2 of the war. The Ukrainians were shooting down loaded airlift aircraft with paratroopers because they did not degrade the Ukrainian air defenses. I mean, imagine an airlift aircraft full of your elite paratroopers on board getting shot down, and that was going on. We're decimating a lot. The Ukrainians did a good job really decimating a lot of the Russian Air Force in their airspace. Conversely, the Russians have been able to be pretty effective too in their airspace. On the other flip side of that, the ability of doing ELINT, detecting where the enemy is operating, and then able to put a very accurate munition on top of that. Both sides have been very good at that too. And so that's another form of electronic warfare. So obviously we're seeing the benefits of having EW or the costs of not having it, both ways in this. And I think that should be an impetus for us. And I think there is. But we're just too slow. It shouldn't take us 5 years, 6 years to turn a ship around. And I don't think other countries take that long. We're too bureaucratic, too slow at the top, and we're not seeing the product coming out on the backside.
Can I say it a different way? And it's perhaps not having served in the military, I get an opportunity to really boil things down to how I get to see them without talking in Pentagonese. And if a member of Congress can't kick it and break their toe on it, they don't want to fund it. That's why, I always tell people, if members of Congress were in charge of creating aircraft carriers, it'd be 435 aircraft carriers, all right? One for each of our districts. And that's part of the problem we face in electronic warfare. It's electrons. You can't kick it. It doesn't show up on TV and blow up. It doesn't, none of this happens. But you mentioned Ukraine. We know how it's being used, and it's being used very well and very effectively in many ways. We know if we're falling behind maybe some others. And if it's that important, then we should be funding it. It's just hard to get people to say, well, what's an electron look like? It's like, I forgot a long time ago what an electron looks like. I know they're really important, and we need to fund them. I know they're really tiny too. Yeah, really tiny, and they're not made of steel, and I can't break my toe on it. But we need to be advocates and promoters and evangelists for it, for this as well, to break through the next. I love the frigate class because they're all going to be in my district. I love it, and I had nothing to do with that decision as well. So good for me. But we need to have the EW capability, the training, the leadership, the education, and the pipeline, because they're usually first.
Representative Bacon, I really appreciate your comment on the focus on operations, right? Trying to closely link operations to the electromagnetic spectrum activities, just because it is such a dynamic area. And as DoD starts to talk more about mission integration, we're enabling military forces to operate together and create new effects chains or kill chains. Seems electromagnetic spectrum capabilities are going to be at the heart of that, yet one of the challenges we've observed is that there really aren't strong modeling and simulation capabilities, either in the Joint Staff or in STRATCOM, so hopefully this new organization can help make that possible. A question I had for the three of you was hearkening back to the balloon crisis we faced, where Chinese stratospheric balloons penetrated U.S. airspace, and I think it underscored the fact that there are balloons, there are satellites, there are probably in-place assets here in the United States that can collect on military operations and can observe our training exercises and the like. As Congress starts to think about range modernization in different ways, are there new opportunities to think about virtual and constructive training that can probably home station training, make units better when they practice where they are at home, but also make it so that it's more difficult for adversaries to collect when they do these large combined exercises?
With electronic warfare, you have to have a lot of simulations because a lot of things we do are top secret. So you go to Nellis or you go to wherever down at Utah, and you start doing your special jamming modes, those are easily collected upon. So I know flying a Compass Call aircraft for a long time, and also flying in the RC-135s. You need to fly a little bit because you got to get that air sense. But a lot of things we do in the air, you're not actually doing it. In a simulator, you can use all your modes, and then you can show what kind of degradation it's having on this radar or on this data signal, which you can't do in real life. So you got to have a very good simulation capability if you want to be good at electronic warfare. And how do you make all the various assets work together, whether it's air or ground? You really can only do that also simulation, because the minute you do that real world, they got satellites sucking all that in, probably got ground sources as well, as far as we know. So you got to have it. I thought it was interesting on the balloon, the Northcom commander came in and said they just didn't have the radars programmed for balloons. They programmed for the Doppler, essentially, for things going 300 or 400, 500 miles an hour. Balloons don't do that, so they had to change their filters to do that. And then we learned also from that they had a very, the ability to share all that data over a common network was also very poor. So we walked away from the Northcom commander briefing that there is a lot of work needs to be done on the C2 and the ability for everybody to have the same picture of what's going on. But to answer your question, we need a very good simulation capability. Actually, we put some of that in legislation too. And I think the JEC will be a good advocate for this. And the fact that we're putting electronic warfare cells, that's not really the appropriate name for it, and all our COCOMs is going to help. So there's a lot of the structures being put in place that I think will make a difference there.
Another question I wanted to ask the three of you has to do with cooperation with allies and partners. The National Defense Strategy talks about how critical allies and partners are to U.S. national security interests. We invariably will operate with allies and partners, yet our ability to integrate our operations or even collaborate sometimes in the electromagnetic spectrum is limited. So as you have sort of engagements with some of your counterparts and go on congressional delegation visits, is this topic of EMS operations starting to bubble up, and is that something that you've considered raising in some of your NDAA work?
It's a little tough, but because if you thought the knowledge of members of Congress is weak on electronic warfare, go to countries with militaries that don't have the capability at all. And so I go to NATO Parliamentary Assembly 3 times a year. We're meeting with our NATO partners, maintaining relationships, maintaining the budgets in these countries, trying to get them to up their budgets in these countries, for those who need it upped as well. But one thing, over the last, it was pre-Ukraine, but certainly over the last several years, NATO has done a better job of developing mechanisms where countries of NATO can cooperate outside of doing military activity like Ukraine. And one such effort is the Defense Innovation Accelerator for North America, or shorthand is DIANA, conveniently. It's basically a mashup. Think of a mashup of DARPA, of private sector, and intelligence. So it's basically they're trying to create a 31 country, soon to be 32 country, officially effort to invest in emerging technologies and collect the money, collect the money from all these countries to invest in emerging technologies that can be used for NATO-specific needs. And so there's a whole process to define what those needs are. Barbara McQuiston out of R&E in the Pentagon is the chair of the board of DIANA. We're able to make that happen. There's 2 Americans on the board, so we're going to have some influence. We authorize in the NDA. We put an authorization so the DoD could spend money on it. It's a lousy $47 million over 5 years compared to the $1.1 billion that the European friends are going to be putting, Canadian friends are going to be putting in. So it's a very small investment for hopefully a big payoff. But that's sort of a process, and we're on the early stages of that. But I think, again, our prowess in EW really makes it difficult to fully cooperate because it really is a matter of educating folks on what it is and how it can be used.
Hey, can I give one success story?
No happiness.
Yeah,
no, we're here to create problems.
I'm a quarter glass full guy. Gotta think about that one for a second. So I had 4 assignments in the 55th Wing, and so EC-130s, RC-135s are my background big time. The British bought 3 RC-135s, and we had 17 in the Air Force. They bought 3, so that's a fleet of 20. And I was sort of I had to oversee the training. So we brought in the British into Offutt. We're training guys that had 4,000 hours in the Nimrod. They were teaching us a lot of things. The British they pretty much invented electronic warfare, frankly. And so having that synergy between us, they were learning how to fly the RC, but they were teaching us a lot on the science of EW. They go to one weapon system frequently. That's where they stay for 30 years. We do our 3-year assignments. So just this different culture. But we really benefit from this mutual training. But my vision, and I worked with Pat Flood on this, who's on our team now, our vision was, let's not treat this 17-3. I did not want to have a U.S. RC, just hypothetically flying out of Value Deed, focused on Iran, and then the British think they have to have that there too, theirs, when we could maybe treat like a fleet of 20, and we can we need to have a need there, the British go over here, we got a need over here, the American will go over here. But that that means you have to have a common database. Everything goes in the database. I will tell you, I failed while I was active duty, but it became a reality after I left. I couldn't get a fleet of 20. The Joint Staff insisted on 17 and 3 because we've never done it any way different. Thankfully, after I left, maybe they just needed a better advocate. They saw the light. Now they treat it like a fleet of 20. And I tell you, that's a win-win for Britain and America. But the way to do that, then everything has to go into a common database because if we won't share what we just learned over X, well, then the British can have the plane there. So we got to be able to share that data so that we can integrate our 20. We got that done. But then we had no form. So we've been able to so we had to beat that down so that the British can have full access. Yeah. And then to really do that, you have to be able to put British on US airplanes, Americans on British airplanes. We're doing that now. It's really I think it's the benchmark of how allies can work together in the EW area. But it did come easy.
But I
didn't get there. I didn't get there during my active duty time.
Yeah, and if I could kind of go back to the original part of the question, which is allies, and I know that you mentioned, Europe and NATO, and before this Congress, I was on foreign affairs and was told I had to get off of foreign affairs to be able to be on Intel. The Democrats, and had focused on Asia in particular. So a lot of my travel is in Asia. And I would say, similar to what Rick you're observing, is it's hard to have these conversations when the understanding is very nascent right now, and the priorities are in other areas, not surprisingly. And so it's something that needs to be brought up, and something that needs to be part of the conversation, just as we're talking about AI, or we're talking about any number of kinds of more sexy things that people understand or at least conceive of a little bit better. So I think that we are leaders in this area, and we need to make sure that we're leading with that. It's given me something to think about when I go on my trips that I'll make sure that I'll be talking about in the same way that I'm talking about all the other kinds of security issues that we're having with our allies.
I suggest, why can't we take the US-British model, though, and let's see how we can expand that. Yeah. I think Australia would be a common sense next up, and then maybe Japan. I'm just saying, there's a way that we can.
So young at this right now, at everything right now.
It is, but without Japan fully in with us, I don't see how we counter China 100%. Too well. So
there are examples. You mentioned Australians, and with the P8s, we sell the P8s there, and other countries as well, Norway. But if I'm not mistaken, Australia's trained some Growler pilots as well, and they have a Growler squadron, I think 2 Growler squadrons as well. But that's great, but it's a platform by platform thing, right? This is like still walking, and there's no running at all, and there's no big idea, there's no big plan, and as opposed to just platform by platform, that's not going to cut it, right? We have to use that as something.
If we have reporters out there, look at that British-U.S. thing, though. It's a good story.
Well, we're certainly respectful of your time, and I know we're going to lose Congressman Larson here in about 6 minutes. So
that's a really hard question.
I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Please, so I just ask if you could please identify yourself and then ask a question as part of that. And so Morgan will bring the mic to the first question here in the front, please.
Hi, Mark Pomerlo with Defense Scoop. Congressman Bacon, going back to what you were talking about capability, what can Congress do to help accelerate that, right? The Army's been talking about getting a jammer out for the last 10 years, and outside of QRC capability, this year, I think, is the first year they'll get it. Next-gen jammer is another example. What can Congress do to maybe accelerate capability, delivery, and development in kind of the software-centric area?
We're going to have to keep pushing until they start leading in this area. That's what, unfortunately, that's how I perceive it. An example, one of the services, I'm trying to be nice, gave us a brief saying, this is the capability we need to counter our threats in Asia. I go, how much are you budgeting for? And it was 0. You're like, there's a disconnect there. Until they could come in and say, this is our need, and here's our plan to get there, and here's how we're spending the money, it's just all talk. And so I feel compelled that we have to keep pushing them until they say until they're leading on us, and I just haven't seen it yet. And I get it too, there's a finite budget. We're trying to do F-35s and the Air Force side, B-21s, ICBMs, and everybody's got all these needs that it makes it hard to fit all of it into one budget, and I understand that. But what they're really saying is, okay, we need this capability, but we're not going to spend it. They're pretty much asking us to find a way to do it for them. That's my take. That's not a very fulfilling answer.
If I could try to maybe add some context to it. So after after the end of the Cold War, when Air Force got out of EW, and really the Navy was the only airborne platform, at least with the Prowler, eventually the Growler. And then when Afghanistan and Iraq came along, obviously with the IEDs and roadside bombs really brought up this issue of how to counter those. And you counter those with, by jamming them, in part. And so the Navy had all sorts of these folks on IA, individual augmentee. They'd show up in Iraq or Afghanistan. The Army would say, "What are you guys doing here?" And say, "We're here to help." And how could the Navy help? Because there was just zero sort of base knowledge about jamming. And I know Pete Corelli stood up a cadre, about 1,200 or so folks, to try to train up for jamming as part of JIATO and so on. I only bring this up because it just seems like, and I love the Navy because they're in my district. Okay, I'm a little biased on this one, sorry guys. But it just seems the other services, since they haven't been in the business for a while, are still even trying to find their place in EW, and that's why Stratcoms and this effort is so important. It's what we've been screaming for 20 plus years. It's like the Pentagon needs to put an umbrella on this and provide some direction and provide the path to resources. And the Army jamming is going to be different than what the Navy's doing, and the Marine Corps is going to be different than what the Army's doing, and the Air Force is going to be different. But there is a common issue here, and that's electronic warfare and its ability to set an environment. It just depends what environment are you trying to set and who's the best person in the services to do that. And it's just been a 23-year frustration. And before me, I didn't start the EW working group. It existed 6 to 10 years before I got there. Joe Pitts was from Pennsylvania.
I remember going visiting when I was a colonel.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you asked that question, and it's just like, when you were a reporter at 4 years old, did you ask me that question then too? Because it's the same question. The same answer. Yeah.
Each trigger a thought. There are success stories out there, though. Compass Call was designed to jam communications, some specialized radars and other things. During the IED fight, they put some special jammers on board to trigger IEDs. And so I commanded 2 squadrons of Compass Calls, a group and a wing of it over my career. In the mid-2000s, when General Mattis was a 2-star, he was out in Anbar province, and he had a route he had to take that day, and they scheduled one of our Compass Calls to jam that route, and multiple IEDs exploded on his route. And he said they were set up for him, knowing he was there. And so the great quote for me, being a commander at that time, Compass Call saved my life. And but that's some of the things that EW can do. And to me, it's a very tangible example.
Well, I hate to be frustrating and go, but thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. I got to get back to the hill. So.
Thank you.
This is a
you
war
very
of
much.
attrition.
All right, thanks a lot.
Can we hold on to you all for another 10 minutes?
Yeah,
I'm good.
about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor?
I had a question that was sent in via email by someone who wasn't able to attend in person. And that was a question sort of on lessons learned from Ukraine that you think might be relevant in an Indo-Pacific fight against a peer adversary like China. Is I guess the severity of the environment in Ukraine translating or certain elements of that fight sort of resonating as you have conversations with DoD and encouraging folks to either take experiential lessons, what they're observing in Ukraine, or say, well, we have to do better modeling and simulation so that we can actually assess how a fight would take place involving the EMS?
I'll start, then we'll yield back. But supply chain, obviously, big issue. We have hollowed out our abilities to just do basic production. So I think Ukraine's really put a light on our abilities to produce. And I would say the same is in EW, you know, we've gone to just a couple of companies. When you do that, that's going to raise the price of, you know, doing business there. I think when it comes to the operational side, I'm more operational than on the logistics side of it. Just I've been on the operational side my whole life. It seems to me on the bad side, neither side could get air superiority. And part of it was none of them had dominant ability to degrade radars and be able to take out the eyes and ears of the other side. So therefore, when they flew aircraft in the other person's airspace, those aircraft are getting shot down. So they either need to have, you know, the more stealth side, or they got to be going after those radars. But neither side has been able to achieve air superiority, and the lack of the EW abilities there is one of the reasons why. So you would say if they had better EW, they could have had more dominant over the other person's airspace. On the other side of that, with precision munitions, which can replace a lot of aircraft, they've been deadly, right? When you can hit a mailbox at 100 kilometers, then you match that with ELINT and targeting capabilities. The Ukrainians have it and the Russians have it. And so now you see EW being used on the positive side of identifying where a target's at in quick order, and then you got a precision munition that can hit that. So I've seen areas where they had better EW, it could have had an impact, but where you see where it's very effective, being very deadly as well. So I see the good and bad going on here.
I can't add a whole lot more to that other than to go back to the supply chain issues. One of the reasons why I was able to go with then Chairman Smith to Australia and to India early days on this battle or this war was because of a concern of how we were going to backfill a lot of the things that we were expending or sending to Ukraine. Manufacturing and production of a lot of the things that we are worried about having enough of. We need to be thinking more about how we're doing that with our allies or people like, frankly, India as well. And so I do worry about the fact that we need to be more thoughtful about how we can backfill and have hot, production lines or warm production lines of things, for what is probably going to be. At least we should be preparing for whatever could happen in Indo-PACON, and we should be learning lessons from that. The other thing, as you mentioned, I'm intrigued by this, and we could get into probably an argument about this. I agree with you. I think the surgical precision of a lot of the weaponry that we have has been demonstrated in Ukraine. One of the things I was anxious about was the use of cluster bombs and cluster munitions because they're not surgically precise. And I understand that we're in that place where we have to use whatever we have. I'm just frustrated that we didn't have enough of things that were more effective.
I don't disagree with you on that to a degree. We should have sent them ATACMs. What happened, the White House decided not to send ATACMs, which has a 300-kilometer range, could hit a mailbox at that range. Just the hyperbole there. But
all the things
so by not sending them what the Russians did, we sent them the HIMARS. They moved their key logistic areas back enough where the HIMARS can impact. If we send them ATACMs, that's a game changer. But for whatever reason, the White House is reluctant. And so as an alternative, a weak alternative, they're going to send the cluster munitions. I really think the ATACMs would be a game changer because once again, you can use your targeting abilities, some of that being ELINT and other intelligence, and those ATACMs would be. I don't see that's got to be the biggest game changer we could do going forward. Problem is I always feel like we're doing too little, too late, and we're compromising what we send them, and then
catching up.
Which is hoping Ukraine not lose. I'd like to help them win.
Those are great observations. I think in particular on this topic of precision munitions, right, and how it's really changed warfare and the ability to precisely target locations. It's also, I think, been really interesting to observe in the war in Ukraine how even some precise munitions, like the Storm Shadow cruise missiles, they've been doing structured attacks. So they'll send miniature air-launched decoys to help open up the path, and then the precision munitions will come out, because even those precision munitions are vulnerable to electronic attack or countermeasures. So EMS capabilities are essential across the board, basically.
It's about what we were doing in Vietnam with the F-4s, decoys for the 105s, right?
Absolutely. Saw that there's another question from the floor, please.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone for being a part of this panel. Dave Muller, currently with AT&T. Previously, I was one of the authors of the EMS Superiority Strategy and ran the implementation plan effort.
Have a seat.
But I want to just agree with Representative Bacon's comment earlier that I agree with you that I think a large majority of the advances we've made in the last 6 years directly due to the action, particularly the questions that Congress keeps asking about this, and making sure that DoD keeps a focus on it. I'd like to talk or ask you real quickly about the spectrum sharing initiatives, because I think that often it gets clouded as a domestic issue, and these 5G networks based on 3GPP
They're going up
standards,
everywhere.
they're global.
Good point you made.
Yeah, and Tim pointed that out
Yeah.
earlier, and DoD is going to need to operate around these networks. It's probably the most predictable form of interference in the congested environment of the MOE. And I'd like to focus on DoD recognizing it needs to find the solutions for that. And when we talk about domestic spectrum sharing, and I think we've got good initiatives going on here, and there's a lot of conversation, information sharing going on. And my hat's off to Vernita Harris and her team, who put together a good process to keep industry and DoD talking about this. Here in the States, we can work with DoD and help identify the waveform and figure out mitigation techniques, but we need to drive towards real solutions. Those solutions eventually have to be inherent in DoD systems, which have to mitigate that interference with a non-cooperative partner, an overseas network. And right now, the Spectrum Relocation Fund, which is used to move DoD systems when to vacate spectrum, it eliminates the ability to, or by statute, it's not allowed to fund improvements in capabilities. I was wondering if you representatives would support opening that up to improved capabilities and making an incentive to the services to actually use Spectrum Relocation Fund assets to fund those capabilities that wouldn't just enable spectrum sharing domestically, but also mitigate interference overseas. Because right now it seems like, it's like telling someone that has a 1995 Chevy, hey, I'll buy a car to replace your Chevy, but you can't get a single thing in that new car that isn't in your 95 Chevy. That's not very realistic. So I just ask if you'd comment on the need for those interference mitigation techniques overseas, and perhaps the willingness to open up the Spectrum Relocation Fund.
Well, you said it very clearly. It's realistic. Yeah, we could do everything in our country to deconflict. China's already made the decision to favor 5G over S-band. So other countries are doing the same. So even if we make it good in our country, we're not flying missions in our country, combat missions. Hopefully we're not. Hopefully not in our lifetime, right? But we're going to be flying in the Far East and Europe where they're not worried about the S-band conflict, and they're going to put in the 5G. So we do have to find a way for the military to work around it, and it's a fact of life that we got to solve. So thank you.
Well, I think we have one final quick question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This is James Stewart. I'm the Spectrum Warfare Systems Department Chief Scientist at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane, Indiana. Just a quick tidbit about Crane. It's the largest contingency of folks devoted to EW on the globe. 1,200 or so folks devoted to EW in all domains. We support air, ground, surface, EW as well. And with our strong expeditionary force, we are pushing towards a joint MSO to assess, develop, and field distribute operational solutions at the tactical edge. So my question is this. Last week, I was at the University of Nebraska, in your home state.
Go Big Red.
Yeah, for sure. Kicking off a project that deals with manipulating the truth, which is what I like to call EW, right? We're manipulating truth. Some may say the media does that as well.
Or masking
Exactly.
the truth. You're right.
Exactly, or masking the truth. So the project deals with manipulating the truth with regards to adaptive environments. We can't go into much beyond that. But it's for ensuring that our warfighters can have an informed offensive set of actions to execute, right? So it's a different paradigm shift from traditional EW, right? Traditional EW is all about enabling kinetic fire. This new paradigm shift is about how can we leverage the spectrum, the EMS, for offensive means and deceptive means. Mm-hmm. So my question is, what policies do you feel we need to put in place to ensure that we can get the advocacy for this new necessary shift in how EW is managed, right? EW leaders understand that this is where electromagnetic warfare needs to go. The warfighters understand.
You raise a very good truth. Sometimes we look at EW and that stovepipe, but really it's part of the IO. And I don't know if I have my terms right anymore. I've been retired since 2014. But the IO world has, PsyOps, deception, EW, and I'm forgetting some. And I've done a lot of all of that in my 30 years in the Air Force. I mean, I was doing IO in Iraq. I'm published on deception. But it's all part of the IO portfolio. So what you're really saying is this project, University of Nebraska, is looking at this as more in the IO run. It's one of the tools in the IO. And we just have to walk back and just remember, you have air domain, sea domain, land domain, space domain, cyber. EW is all about degrading all those domains and creating havoc and then communicating with each other. If we can degrade the communications or radars for air and space, I mean, our job is to undermine all those, to be operating in all those domains and helping to get superiority in each of those domains. And it could be putting trons on a target. We could use cyber for an EW output or EW for a cyber output, right? So we have to be very broad and imaginative how we use EW, but it is part of the art of IO.
Could I turn the question back on you and say, is there an answer to the question, what are the policies that we should be thinking about in Congress? He's got it behind you.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit when we talked about the need for modeling and simulation, right? It's all about ensuring that our warfighters have confidence. And how do you gain that confidence? It's about making sure that we can test out and look at the effectiveness through live virtual constructive, right? So I feel like putting policies in place and legislation that supports, advanced labs, advanced modeling simulation labs that look at live and virtual simulation environments, I think is important.
Thank you. That's helpful. It's definitely one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation is the modeling and simulation, the essence of that, and the importance of that.
Well, thank you, James, for that excellent question, and thank you, representatives, for joining us today. Your leadership, sort of, and passion for this really is the reason why DoD is now starting to move forward on treating the EMS as a critical warfighting area and starting to address, I think, some of the glaring gaps that we have today to seek advantage in the future. Grateful to all of you for joining us for this conversation. And as I think Congress continues its work, there's going to be new opportunities to, one, I think, figure out what you pass with the Senate, and then two, chart out the future. So any final words?
Yeah, I want to thank Chrissy. This is our third panel in so many weeks. She's going to get real tired of me fast. And now we're going to do a quality of life. We're in charge of the quality of life panel, trying to help out our junior enlisted primarily who are having to get on SNAP. We got housing issues, we got daycare issues, we got medical. And so we have about 9 months to come up with proposals for the HASC for the next NDA to improve quality of life. So we're back together in 2 hours.
Yeah, and I also want to echo that appreciation for you. We were just talking yesterday. We've been on so many things together, whether supply chain or STEM and STEAM, and now this, and I'm learning a great deal. So thank you for being my partner in crime on this, and I'll see you in another couple hours.
All right. Yeah. Reload.
And thanks to Brian and the AOC for joining us as a partner in this, and to all of you for coming once more. Have a good day.